In the glittering heart of London society, where fortunes are made and reputations are shattered with a single whisper, one woman is a beautiful, frustrating enigma. Lady Genevieve Beaumont, celebrated for her wit, and beauty is known for just one thing vanishing. From every glittering ballroom, every soul-crushing soiree, she finds a way to escape her gilded cage. But tonight is different. Watching from the shadows is Cassian Valerius, the Duke of Blackwood, a man so emotionally distant they call him the coldest duke. And as Lady Genevieve slips through a velvet curtain once more, the Duke does the unthinkable. He follows. The chandeliers of Lancaster House wept crystals of light, scattering fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor. A symphony of silk, rustled diamonds glittered, and the air, thick with expensive perfume and polite lies, was almost too heavy to breathe. For Lady Genevieve Beaumont, it was not a celebration. It was a beautifully decorated prison. Her smile, a carefully practiced curve of her lips, felt as brittle as spun sugar. She stood beside her aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose entire existence seemed to be a constant low-level hum of anxiety. "You see, Genevieve?" Her aunt whispered, her fan fluttering like a trapped bird. "Lord Harrington is making his way over. Do try to look available. His father owns half the shipping lanes in the Channel." Genevieve's smile tightened. Lord Harrington. A man whose charm was as polished as his shoes, and she suspected just as superficial. He was everything a young lady of her station was supposed to desire, wealthy, well-connected, and relentlessly dull. As he approached, his blonde hair gleaming under the candlelight, Genevieve felt the familiar urge, the desperate thrumming beneath her skin that screamed for escape. "Lady Genevieve, you are the singular star in this firmament," Harrington said, his bow a little too deep, his smile a little too wide. "May I have the honor of this waltz?" "Lord Harrington," Genevieve replied, her voice smooth as cream. "You flatter me, but I fear the heat of the room has left me quite fatigued. Perhaps later." It was a polite but clear refusal. A flicker of annoyance crossed his handsome features before being smoothed away. "Of course, my lady. I shall wait with bated breath." He moved on effortlessly, transferring his practiced flattery to the next eligible debutante. "Genevieve," her aunt hissed, "you cannot keep turning him down. People will talk. They already are. The vanishing lady. They call you. It is not a flattering epithet." Genevieve's gaze drifted across the room, over the sea of bobbing heads and false smiles, until it landed on him. He stood near a marble column, a figure of stark stillness in the swirling chaos. Duke Cassian Valerius, the Duke of Blackwood. He was tall and severe, dressed in immaculate black that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, was a mask of cold indifference. He rarely spoke, never smiled, and his dark eyes missed nothing. They called him the coldest duke, a man whose heart was rumored to be as frozen as his fortune was vast. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded room. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a chilling, analytical intelligence. It was as if he were not looking at her, but through her, dissecting her motives, her polite facade, and the carefully concealed panic he seemed uniquely capable of sensing. She felt a shiver trace its way down her spine, a sensation that was equal parts fear and fascination. He was the antithesis of the fawning Lord Harrington. He was a block of unyielding granite in a world of soft clay. And he was always watching. At every ball, every gathering she was forced to attend, she would feel the weight of his stare. It was unnerving. While other men saw a prize to be won, the Duke of Blackwood seemed to see a puzzle to be solved. The orchestra swelled, beginning another waltz. The dancers spun a kaleidoscope of colour and motion, and the walls of the ballroom seemed to press in on Genevieve. The laughter sounded shrill, the chatter meaningless. It was the 2-year anniversary of her father's death, a fact no one else in this room seemed to remember or care about. They saw only the Beaumont name and the dowry that came with it. They didn't see the grief that still clung to her like a shroud, or the gnawing suspicion that his death, a tragic fall from his horse during a hunt, was no accident. That was why she had to escape. It was not just the stifling atmosphere or the vapid suitors. It was the desperate need for answers, a need that could not be met within these gilded walls. "Aunt Eleanor, I find I must have a glass of lemonade," Genevieve murmured, her hand already moving to extract herself from her aunt's grasp. The heat is truly becoming unbearable. "Do not be long," her aunt warned, her eyes already scanning the room for other potential alliances. "And stay where you can be seen." But Genevieve had no intention of being seen. With the grace of a shadow, she moved along the edge of the ballroom, using the vibrant clusters of gossiping matriarchs and potted ferns as cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of anticipation. She knew the layout of Lancaster House, just as she knew the layouts of a dozen other manors. She had made it her business to learn the escape routes, the servants' corridors, the quiet libraries, the forgotten side doors that led to the blessed, silent dark of the gardens. She found her target, a heavy crimson velvet curtain partially obscuring a narrow door. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed no one was paying her any mind. They were all enthralled by the spectacle, by the dance of courtship and commerce, all except one. From across the room she saw the Duke of Blackwood's head lift slightly. His gaze, sharp and penetrating, locked directly onto her. For a terrifying moment, she thought he would call out, expose her, bring the whole glittering facade crashing down around her. He did not. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, as she slipped behind the curtain. The latch of the door was old and stiff, but it yielded to her practiced touch with a faint click. She slid through the opening and closed it softly behind her, the muffled strains of the orchestra fading away. She was free. The cool night air was a balm on her heated skin. The scent of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine replaced the cloying perfume of the ballroom. Here in the moon-drenched gardens, she could finally breathe. She hurried down a gravel path, her silk slippers crunching softly, moving towards the appointed meeting place, a secluded folly at the far end of the estate's labyrinthine hedge maze. She felt a sense of triumph of having once again outsmarted her keepers. But she could not shake the image of the Duke's dark, watchful eyes. For the first time, her escape did not feel entirely clean. It felt observed. It felt incomplete. She dismissed the feeling as paranoia. What would the coldest Duke, a man who embodied societal convention, care about one errant lady fleeing a party? He had his reputation to maintain, his icy perch from which to judge the rest of them. He would do nothing. She was wrong. Back in the ballroom, Duke Cassian Valerius remained by his column for a full 10 seconds after she disappeared. He watched Lord Harrington laugh with a cabinet minister. He observed Mrs. Vance anxiously scanning the crowd. Then, with a quiet deliberation that belied the unprecedented nature of his actions, he set his untouched champagne flute down on a passing servant's tray and began to move. He did not head for the grand exit, but for the same crimson curtain through which Lady Genevieve Beaumont had vanished. He too was escaping the ballroom, and this time he was following her. The gardens of Lancaster House were a study in sculpted shadows. Moonlight filtered through the skeletal branches of ancient oaks, painted the gravel paths in silver and black. Genevieve moved with a practiced urgency, her hand trailing along the cool, damp leaves of the hedge maze, its familiar turns a map etched in her memory. The Folly, a small Grecian-style temple of weathered marble, stood on a small rise ahead, its columns stark against the star-dusted sky. This was her destination. This was where she hoped to find a sliver of truth. She reached the Folly and stepped into its deeper shadows, her back pressing against the cold stone. She scanned the surrounding gardens, her senses on high alert. This was the most dangerous part. Her informant, Mr. Davies, was a timid man, a former clerk in her father's firm, and he was terrified of the people he believed were responsible for her father's death. Their meetings were always brief, fraught with a nervous tension that left her own nerves frayed for days afterward. The air grew still. The distant sounds of the city were a low hum, the music from the party a ghostly whisper. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. Genevieve froze her hand, flying to the small weighted reticule at her wrist. It was a poor weapon, but the only one she had. "Mr. Davies," she called out, her voice barely more than a breath. Silence. Another sound, this time closer. The soft crunch of a boot on gravel, too heavy, too deliberate for the shuffling, anxious steps of Mr. Davies. This was the tread of someone who was not afraid of being heard. Someone who moved with absolute confidence. Her heart leapt into her throat. Had she been discovered? Had Harrington or someone worse followed her? She flattened herself further against the column, trying to melt into the darkness. She held her breath, listening. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse, thick with unspoken threat. "The night air is indeed refreshing, Lady Genevieve," a voice said, low and resonant, cutting through the stillness. "But I find it rarely improves one's health to linger in the damp." Genevieve's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was a voice that never betrayed emotion, as perfectly modulated and controlled as its owner. She stepped out from behind the column, her chin held high, forcing a mask of cool composure onto her face. The Duke of Blackwood stood at the entrance to the Folly, a tall, dark silhouette against the moonlit path. He had not bothered with stealth. He stood there, as if he had every right to be. His dark coat was unbuttoned, and his hands were clasped behind his back. The moonlight carved his severe features from the shadow, making him look more like a marble statue than a man. "Your Grace," she said, her voice betraying only the slightest tremor. "You seem to have lost your way. The ballroom is in the opposite direction." "On the contrary," he replied, taking a slow step forward. "I am precisely where I intended to be. The more interesting question is, why are you—" His dark eyes raked over her, noting her hurried breathing, the tension in her shoulders. He was not making a polite inquiry. It was an interrogation. "As I told Lord Harrington, I was feeling faint." She lied the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. A moment of quiet and some fresh air was all I required. A corner of his mouth twitched a minuscule movement that was the closest he ever came to a sneer. "You have been taking the air for nearly 15 minutes, my lady, and you moved with a purpose that suggested a destination, not a mere stroll. You have done this before, at the Ridgeway Gala and the Duchess of Abernathy's spring ball. You vanish." She was stunned into silence. He had been noticing, cataloguing her escapes. The thought was deeply unsettling. He was not just a passive observer, he was an active one. "I am not aware my social habits are a subject of your study, Your Grace." She retorted, her fear giving way to a spark of defiance. "I should think a man of your stature would have more important matters to occupy his time." "Ordinarily you would be correct," he said, taking another step closer. The space between them shrank, charged with a sudden, potent energy. However, your disappearances have become a source of speculation, and I do not care for unanswered questions. So I ask you again, why are you here? Before she could formulate another lie, a frantic rustling in the bushes nearby announced a new arrival. A small, balding man in a slightly shabby coat stumbled onto the path, his eyes wide with fear. Mr. Davies. He stopped dead when he saw the Duke, his face paling to a ghostly white. He looked from the formidable Duke to Genevieve, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. My lady," he stammered, wringing a worn cap in his hands. I did not know you had company." The Duke's gaze shifted to Davies, his eyes narrowing with cold, sharp scrutiny. He assessed the man in an instant, his cheap clothes, his terror, the desperation etched on his face. This was no clandestine romantic tryst. This was something else entirely. "It seems your moment of quiet is about to become rather crowded," the Duke murmured to Genevieve, his voice a low vibration, meant only for her. Panic seized Genevieve. The Duke's presence would ruin everything. Davies would never speak in front of him. This precious, hard-won opportunity for information was dissolving into a disastrous social scandal. She had to get him to leave. "This is a private matter, Your Grace," she said, stepping between him and the terrified clerk. "A matter of charity. This man's family has fallen on hard times, and I was offering some assistance discreetly." It was a plausible lie, the sort of thing a well-bred lady might do, but the Duke of Blackwood was not easily fooled. He saw the way Davies was clutching a small, folded piece of paper in his trembling hand. He saw the sheer, abject terror in the man's eyes, a fear that went far beyond mere social awkwardness. "A commendable impulse, Lady Genevieve," the Duke said, his voice dangerously soft. "Yet your charity seems to inspire a great deal of fear in its recipient." Davies, seeing his escape route cut off by the imposing figure of the Duke, took a desperate step towards Genevieve. "The papers, my lady," he whispered, his voice trembling. "From the East Warehouse manifest. It's as you suspected. The dates? They don't add up. After the accident." He shoved the folded paper into her hand. I can't be seen here. He'll know I talked." Before Genevieve could respond, Davies turned and bolted, scrambling back into the darkness of the hedge maze like a frightened rabbit. Genevieve quickly concealed the note in her gloved hand. The silence that descended was heavy and suffocating. She was trapped. She had been caught not in a simple social transgression, but in something far deeper and more dangerous. And her sole witness was the most powerful, unreadable man in London. She finally looked up to meet his eyes. They were no longer just analytical. They were hard, sharp, and utterly relentless. "Charity, Lady Genevieve?" he asked, his voice dripping with icy skepticism. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. You are involved in something dangerous, and I want to know what it is." The air in the folly crackled with tension. Genevieve clutched the note Mr. Davies had given her, the paper, a fragile secret in her palm. The Duke of Blackwood stood before her, an immovable object, his very presence a threat to the fragile investigation she had so carefully constructed. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, a plausible lie, anything to make him leave. But one look at his unyielding face told her that evasion was no longer an option. "What I am involved in, Your Grace, is a family matter," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "It does not concern you. When it involves clandestine meetings in gardens with terrified men who speak of falsified manifests and accidents, it ceases to be a simple family matter." He countered his tone, leaving no room for argument. It becomes a matter of potential crime, and that concerns the law, which is something I happen to respect. He took the final step that closed the distance between them. He was so close now she could see the faint silver flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the intimidating force of his personality pressing in on her. She resisted the urge to retreat. "You have no proof of any crime," she challenged. "I have the evidence of my own eyes," he said, his gaze dropping to her clenched fist. A terrified informant, a secret exchange, and a lady of quality lying to me with remarkable, if not entirely convincing composure. "Hand me the note." It was not a request. It was a command delivered with the quiet authority of a man who was never disobeyed. For a moment, Genevieve considered refusing, throwing the note into the bushes running. But where would she run? He would have her stopped before she took 3 steps. He could ruin her, expose her, and her quest for justice for her father would be over before it truly began. She was cornered. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice low and fierce. "You are the embodiment of the society that forces these secrets. For all I know, you are friends with the very people I suspect." A flicker of something, was it surprise, respect, passed through his eyes. "You have a point," he admitted, the concession startling her. "You have no reason to trust me. But you also have no choice. Either you tell me what this is about, or I will have that man found and brought to Bow Street. I assure you he will talk, and the resulting scandal will not only destroy your reputation, but will also alert the very people you are hiding from. Your investigation, whatever it may be, will be over." He was right. His logic was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He had trapped her completely. With a feeling of profound defeat, she slowly unfurled her fingers and held out the crumpled piece of paper. He took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. A strange jolt like static electricity passed between them. He unfolded the note, his expression unreadable as he scanned the contents. It was a series of numbers and dates with a few hastily scrawled words: East India Docks, the Crimson Star, Manifest 4B, payment authorized by H. He read it twice, then slowly folded it and looked back at her. The silence stretched, amplifying the chirping of crickets in the grass. "My father," Genevieve said the words, feeling like stones in her throat. "He was Richard Beaumont of the Beaumont Shipping Line. 2 years ago, he died in what was ruled a hunting accident." The Duke nodded slightly. "I remember. A great loss to the city." "I don't believe it was an accident," she continued, the confession tumbling out now that the dam of secrecy had broken. "He was a master horseman. It never made sense. Just before he died, he told me he had uncovered something, a fraud within his own company. He was worried. He said someone was getting rich off phantom cargo, falsifying manifests for ships that were half empty. He was going to expose them. And you believe whoever he was about to expose arranged his accident?" Cassian finished for her, his voice devoid of surprise. "Yes," she whispered. "Lord Harrington was my father's junior partner. After my father's death, he used his position to take control of a significant portion of the company assets. He has become an extremely wealthy man in a very short amount of time." The Duke's face remained impassive, but his eyes had grown darker, more intense. He said, tapping the note he still held. "Harrington. I can't prove it," Genevieve said, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "This is the first piece of tangible information Mr. Davies has been able to find. He's terrified. Harrington has eyes and ears everywhere." She had expected him to be dismissive, to treat her suspicions as the fanciful notions of a grieving daughter. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point in the darkness. "Your suspicions about Harrington are not entirely unfounded," he said, finally, his voice a low rumble. The admission hung in the air between them, stunning her. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I have my own reasons to be wary of Lord Harrington." The Duke stated, his expression hardening. "He has recently become engaged to my younger sister, Beatrix." The revelation struck Genevieve like a physical blow. Of course, the Duke's sister, one of the most sought-after debutantes of the season. A match with Harrington would be seen as a triumph, a union of old titles and new money. But if Genevieve was right, the Duke's sister was about to marry a murderer and a thief. Suddenly his interest in her, his pursuit into the garden, made a chilling kind of sense. It wasn't just about a breach of social etiquette. It was personal. "I dislike the man," the Duke continued, his voice laced with a cold disdain that was more potent than any shouted insult. "He is too smooth, too eager. My sister is captivated by his charm, but I see only ambition. I've had my men conduct a quiet inquiry into his finances. They are remarkably robust for a man of his former standing. Your theory provides a potential explanation for his sudden fortune." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and for the first time she did not feel like a puzzle he was solving, but a person he was seeing. "You have been doing this alone," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak. The weight of the past 2 years, the feigned smiles, the secret meetings, the constant fear pressed down on her. "That ends tonight," he declared. "You are reckless, Lady Genevieve. You meet with informants in dark gardens where any footman could stumble upon you. Your methods are amateurish and will get you killed. Or worse, get your informant killed." His words were harsh, but they were true. A hot flush of shame rose in her cheeks. "From now on," he continued, "we work together. I have resources you do not. I can provide protection, access, and discretion that you cannot hope to achieve on your own. We will investigate Lord Harrington, and we will uncover the truth. For your father. And for my sister." It was the most astonishing proposal she had ever heard. An alliance with the coldest Duke. It was dangerous, unthinkable, and it was the only real chance she had. She hesitated, the instinct for self-reliance warring with the undeniable logic of his offer. "This is not a negotiation, my lady," he said, his tone final. "This is a statement of fact. You will share everything you know with me, and you will do nothing without my knowledge. In return, I will help you find the justice you seek. Do we have an agreement?" He held out his hand. It was a formal, business-like gesture, yet it felt like something more. A lifeline. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and cool, sending that same strange, unexpected jolt through her veins. "An agreement," she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. The coldest Duke and the vanishing lady. It was an alliance born of shadows and suspicion, a dangerous pact that would either save them both or drag them into an abyss from which there was no escape. The week following the agreement at Lancaster House was a masterclass in duality. To the outside world, Genevieve was the same elusive beauty, attending just enough social functions to keep her aunt from despair, her refusals of Lord Harrington's advances growing more pointed, much to his visible frustration. But beneath the surface, a secret and urgent current flowed between her and the Duke of Blackwood. Their communication was a model of discretion. A book of poetry delivered by a footman would contain a slip of paper between its pages. A seemingly random piece of sheet music left for her at a shop held a message coded in the notes. Genevieve, in turn, would leave a reply, tucked into a specific volume in a lending library she knew he frequented. It was a silent, intricate dance that was both thrilling and terrifying. The note from Mr. Davies was their starting point. The Crimson Star. Manifest 4B. Cassian's resources proved to be as formidable as his reputation. Within 2 days, a message arrived for Genevieve. The Crimson Star is one of Harrington's ships. It docked 2 days after your father's death. According to official port records, its manifest listed a full cargo of silks and spices from Ceylon. My informant at the docks says the ship rode high in the water. It was practically empty. The confirmation sent a chill down Genevieve's spine. It was proof. Her father had been right. Harrington was creating phantom cargo, paying export taxes on it, and then pocketing the vast insurance payouts and trade subsidies. Her father's death had not just been murder. It had been a brutal business transaction. The next message from the Duke was more direct. We need the source documents. Davies mentioned a ledger. Where would your father have kept it? The answer was immediate and problematic. Her father's old office in the city, a place she hadn't visited since his death. It was a suite of rooms in a building overlooking the Thames, now part of the assets Lord Harrington controlled. She replied, explaining the location, and received a summons in response. Hatchard's Bookshop, Piccadilly. 3 o'clock tomorrow. Ask for a first edition of Gulliver's Travels. The following afternoon, Genevieve entered the hallowed, dusty quiet of the famous bookshop. The air smelled of old paper and leather. She found a clerk, made the inquiry, and was directed to a secluded alcove in the back, reserved for rare acquisitions. Duke Cassian Valerius was there, examining a large leather-bound atlas. He looked up as she approached, and the intensity of his gaze made the bustling shop outside seem to melt away. "Lady Genevieve," he said, his voice a low murmur that would not carry. "Thank you for coming." "You wish to speak about the ledger," she said, foregoing pleasantries. Their clandestine partnership had stripped their interactions down to their essential urgent core. "Indeed," he said, closing the atlas with a soft thud. "Harrington keeps the office locked, but he is a creature of habit. Every Thursday evening he plays cards at his Club White's from 9 until well past midnight. Tomorrow is Thursday. The building's night watchman is a man named Peters. He has a weakness for expensive brandy and a deaf ear for a price." Genevieve stared at him, her heart beginning to pound. "You can't be suggesting—" "I am not suggesting we ask Harrington for the key," he replied dryly. "The risk is minimal if timed correctly. I will handle the watchman. We go in, we find the ledger, and we leave. You are the only one who would recognize your father's personal records." The audacity of it was breathtaking. A duke and a lady breaking into an office like common thieves. It was insane, it was dangerous, and it was their only option. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. A flicker of approval lit his dark eyes. "I thought you might. Wear dark colors, practical shoes. Meet me at the corner of Threadneedle Street at 10 o'clock. A carriage will be waiting." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Genevieve, once we take this step, there is no turning back. If we are discovered—" "I am aware of the risks, Your Grace," she interrupted, lifting her chin. I have been aware of them for 2 years. For the first time since she'd met him, a genuine, unguarded emotion crossed his face. It was a look of profound, almost pained respect. He gave her a stiff, formal nod and turned back to his book, a clear dismissal. Their meeting was over. As Genevieve walked out of the bookshop and back into the bright London afternoon, she felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. She was placing her life, her reputation, and her father's legacy into the hands of a man she barely knew, a man the world called the coldest duke. Yet in his company, surrounded by the scent of old books and the gravity of their shared purpose, she had never felt less alone. She was no longer just the vanishing lady fleeing from her life. She was walking toward a confrontation with a formidable and unexpected ally at her side. The shadows were still there, but now she was not the only one walking in them. The night was moonless, the London sky a blanket of charcoal and smoke. The carriage, a plain, unmarked brougham, rattled over the cobblestones of Threadneedle Street before pulling to a stop in a dark alleyway. The door swung open, and the Duke of Blackwood looked out, his face half hidden in shadow. He was dressed like her, in dark, practical clothing that rendered him almost invisible in the gloom. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Genevieve nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and took the hand he offered. His grip was strong and steadying as he helped her down. The air in the city was thick with the smell of coal smoke and the nearby river. "Peters is enjoying a bottle of my finest French brandy in his office. It should keep him occupied for at least an hour," Cassian murmured, leading her towards the dark brick facade of her father's old office building. "We enter through the rear. I acquired a key from a disgruntled former employee." He worked the lock with quiet efficiency, and the heavy oak door swung inward with a barely audible groan. They slipped inside into a hall that was utterly black. Cassian closed the door behind them, plunging them into absolute darkness. For a moment, Genevieve felt a spike of panic, a disorienting sense of being utterly blind. Then she felt his hand find her elbow, a firm, reassuring touch in the void. "This way," he whispered, his voice close to her ear. "The stairs are to the left." He led her through the darkness with an unnerving confidence, as if he could see perfectly. They ascended 3 flights of stairs, their soft-soled shoes making no sound on the wooden treads. Her father's office was at the end of the hall. The lettering on the glass Beaumont shipping line was barely visible in the faint light filtering through a grimy window. Cassian produced another key, and they were in. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and disuse. Harrington had clearly not touched the place, treating it merely as a property asset. Moonlight now seeped through the large office window, illuminating the space in ghostly silver bars. The room was just as she remembered it: her father's large mahogany desk, the tall bookshelves, the globe in the corner. A wave of grief washed over her, so potent it nearly buckled her knees. "We don't have much time." Cassian's voice cut through her reverie, gentle but firm. Where would he have kept a private ledger? Genevieve shook herself, forcing the memories down. My father was meticulous, but he was also theatrical. He loved hidden compartments. He always said the best hiding place was the one no one would think to disturb. Her eyes scanned the room, finally landing on a large, ornate bookcase against the far wall. It was filled with old, leather-bound volumes on maritime law and history. "There," she said, moving towards it. "The third shelf. 4th book from the left. A history of naval warfare." She reached for the thick volume, her fingers trembling slightly. It was heavier than a book should be. As she pulled it from the shelf, she heard a distinct click from within the wall. The entire section of shelving swung inwards, revealing a small dark cavity and a heavy iron safe set into the wall. Cassian was at her side in an instant, a small lantern in his hand. He lit it, and a warm golden glow filled the small space. "Brilliant," he murmured, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "Now for the difficult part." "The combination was my birthday," Genevieve said softly. "Month, day, and year." She knelt before the safe, her heart pounding in her ears. She turned the dial, the clicks echoing loudly in the silent room. right, left, right. She pulled the heavy handle, and the safe door swung open with a low groan. Inside, nestled amongst some legal documents, was a slim, leather-bound ledger. It was the one. She grabbed it, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold it. "We have it." She breathed, a feeling of triumph soaring through her. "Then it's time to leave," Cassian said, already moving to close the secret compartment. Suddenly they heard it. Heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. A gruff voice called out, "Who's up there? I heard something." Peters. The brandy hadn't been enough. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped Genevieve. They were trapped. The office had only one door. Cassian extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging them back into moonlight and shadows. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the desk and into the deepest shadow in the room, a narrow alcove between the large window and a filing cabinet. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, his body pressing her back against the cold wall. He stood in front of her, shielding her, his form a solid barrier between her and the door. The space was incredibly small. Her face was inches from his chest, and she could feel the warmth of his body, hear the steady, calm rhythm of his heart. It was a stark contrast to the frantic hammering of her own. A key rattled in the lock, the office door swung open, and the bulky silhouette of the night watchman appeared, a lantern held high. The light swung across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Genevieve held her breath, convinced he would see them, that it was all over. The beam swept past their hiding place, lingered on the far wall, then swung back. She could smell the brandy on his breath from across the room. He grumbled to himself, "Probably just rats. Place is full of them." He took another cursory look around, his gaze sliding right over the dark alcove, before he shrugged, closed the door and locked it. They listened as his heavy footsteps descended the stairs, the sound fading until silence reclaimed the building. Genevieve remained frozen, pressed against the wall, the ledger clutched to her chest. Cassian didn't move for a long moment. She was intensely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of his clothes, the strength in the arm that was still protectively braced against the wall beside her head. The adrenaline of their near discovery began to recede, replaced by an entirely different kind of tension. He slowly turned his head, his face now inches from hers in the semi-darkness. The moonlight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. The cold, distant Duke was gone. In his place was a man of action and steel, a protector. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice deeper, softer than she'd ever heard it. She could only nod, her throat dry. Their gazes locked. In the silence of the dusty office, with the city sleeping around them, the world seemed to shrink to the small charged space between them. The rigid lines of their alliance, a partnership of convenience and necessity, seemed to blur and soften. He was no longer just a duke, and she no longer just a lady. They were Cassian and Genevieve co-conspirators, partners in a dangerous truth, and for a fleeting, breathless moment, something more. He leaned in, and for a heartbeat, she thought he was going to kiss her. The thought sent a shockwave through her, a startling mix of fear and a longing she hadn't known she possessed. But he stopped his gaze, searching hers, as if asking a question she didn't know how to answer. Then, with a visible effort, he pulled back the spell breaking. "We need to go," he said, his voice, once again, clipped and formal. "Now, while he is convinced it was rats." He took her hand, and this time she did not miss the warmth of his touch as he led her from the shadows and out of the building, the ledger that held Harrington's downfall and her father's justice held safely between them. The ledger was a damning indictment. Page after page in her father's elegant script detailed legitimate shipping business. but interspersed were entries in a cruder hand, with notes in the margins detailing payouts to a shell company Venture Imports, and signed off with a bold, arrogant H. The fraud was undeniable, the timeline linking directly to her father's death. They had the proof. Now they needed the stage. A public accusation without an airtight confession will devolve into his word against ours, Cassian said 2 nights later. They were in the cavernous, dimly lit library of his London townhouse, the ledger open on the desk, between them. He will paint you as a hysterical, grieving daughter. He will use his connections to bury us in litigation and scandal. We need to trap him. How? Genevieve asked, tracing a fraudulent entry with her finger. He is too careful. But he is also arrogant. Cassian countered, his eyes gleaming with a cold, strategic light. He believes he is untouchable. We will use that. My annual masquerade ball is in 3 days, the pinnacle of the season. Everyone will be there. Harrington wouldn't dream of missing it. That is where we will expose him. The plan he outlined was audacious and theatrical, worthy of her father's hidden safe. It relied on precision nerve and a complete understanding of their adversary's vanity. The night of the Blackwood masquerade, the Duke's residence was a vision of opulence. Guests in elaborate costumes and jeweled masks moved through the grand ballroom, their identities a tantalizing mystery. Genevieve wore a simple gown of deep midnight blue and a silver mask that covered only her eyes, a shimmering crescent moon. She felt a strange sense of calm. The end was near. She saw Harrington across the room. He was dressed as a Roman emperor, his mask gilded a laurel wreath on his head. He was holding court laughing, oozing the confidence of a man who believed he ruled the world. He was with Cassian's sister Beatrix, a delicate girl dressed as a nymph, who looked up at him with utter adoration. Seeing them together solidified Genevieve's resolve into tempered steel. Cassian, his identity unmistakable in a severe black domino mask, and the imposing authority of his posture gave her a subtle nod from across the room. It was time. Genevieve made her way through the crowd, her path seemingly aimless, until she accidentally bumped into Lord Harrington. "My lord," she said, her voice full of feigned surprise. "Forgive me." "Lady Genevieve," he said, his smile predatory as he looked her over. "Or should I say, Diana the Huntress, a fitting costume. Though I wonder, what is it you are hunting tonight?" "Perhaps just a moment of peace," she replied, gesturing towards the glass doors of a nearby conservatory. "The ballroom is so overwhelming. Would you grant a lady your escort to the gardens for a breath of air?" His ego, as Cassian predicted, could not resist. A beautiful woman, the very one who had been spurning him, was now seeking a private audience. He offered his arm with a flourish. "It would be my absolute pleasure." He led her into the lush, glass-enclosed conservatory, filled with the scent of orchids and damp earth. The sound of the orchestra was muted here, the chatter of the party, a distant buzz. "Now," he said, turning to her, his eyes gleaming. "To what do I owe this sudden and most welcome change of heart?" Genevieve removed her mask, her expression serious. "There is no change of heart, my lord. I asked you here to discuss my father's death." The smile vanished from his face. "I offer my condolences, of course, but that was 2 years ago. I hardly think a ballroom is the place. I have his ledger," she cut in, her voice clear and cold. "His private ledger, the one he kept in the safe behind the bookcase." Harrington's face went slack with shock, his complexion turning ashen. For a moment, he was speechless. "That's impossible. That office has been sealed." "Not sealed well enough," she pressed on, her heart hammering. I know about venture imports. I know about the phantom cargo on the Crimson Star. I know you authorized the payments. I know you had him killed because he was going to expose you." He recovered quickly, a sneer twisting his lips. "You have nothing. A grieving girl's fantasies twisted by some dusty old book. You have no proof I had anything to do with anything. It is your word against mine, and I am Lord Harrington. Who do you think society will believe? Her, for one," a cold voice said from the doorway. They both turned. The Duke of Blackwood stood there, his mask now removed his face, a grim, unforgiving mask of judgment. And he was not alone. Flanking him were two burly men, Bow Street runners. And behind them, looking pale but resolute, was Mr. Davies. Harrington stared, his bravado crumbling. "Blackwood, what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Lord Harrington," Cassian said, stepping into the conservatory, "is that your engagement to my sister is terminated, and your freedom is at an end." "This is an outrage," Harrington blustered, looking wildly from the Duke to the officers. "You can't prove a thing." "Oh, but we can," the Duke said calmly. "You see, while Lady Genevieve has the ledger, I have something else." He gestured to Mr. Davies. "Mr. Davies was not the only employee who knew of your scheme. He was simply the bravest. After we secured him, he led us to another clerk, one who you paid handsomely to alter the port manifests. This clerk, fearing his own neck, has provided a full-signed confession, one that details your orders to sabotage Richard Beaumont's saddle before his final hunt." Mr. Davies stepped forward, holding a sheaf of papers. "It's all here, my lord. Jonathan Pine's full testimony." Harrington's face collapsed. The colour drained away, leaving behind the stark, ugly truth of his guilt. He was trapped, exposed, his web of lies, torn apart in the glittering heart of the society he had been so desperate to conquer. He made a desperate lunge for the side door of the conservatory, but the Bow Street runners were too quick, seizing him by the arms. As they dragged him away, sputtering threats and denials, a small crowd of the most influential members of the peerage, who had been discreetly guided to the conservatory entrance by the Duke's staff, watched in stunned silence. The unmasking was complete. The conservatory was suddenly quiet. It was over. Genevieve felt a wave of dizziness, a profound, bone-deep relief that was so overwhelming she had to grip the edge of a marble planter to steady herself. Cassian came to her side. He did not touch her, but his presence was a solid grounding force. "It is done," he said softly. "Justice for your father." Genevieve looked at him, at his dark, serious face, and saw not the coldest Duke, but the man who had walked into the shadows with her, the man who had risked everything to help her. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to well in her eyes. "Thank you." She whispered the words wholly inadequate. He simply nodded his gaze, holding hers, and in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a new and unspoken truth began to dawn between them. The arrest of Lord Harrington at the Duke of Blackwood's masquerade ball was a scandal of unprecedented proportions. It dominated the broadsheets and drawing rooms for weeks. The tale was sensational, a murderous plot, a vast fraud, and the unexpected duo who had brought it to light, the grief-stricken but tenacious daughter of the victim, and the formidable, unimpeachable Duke. Genevieve's reputation was irrevocably altered. She was no longer the vanishing lady, an eccentric debutante. She was hailed as a paragon of filial devotion and courage, a woman of substance and steel. The days that followed were a blur of legal formalities and the quiet, steady dismantling of Harrington's stolen empire. Cassian, with his characteristic efficiency, managed the fallout, shielding both Genevieve and his distraught sister from the worst of the public's morbid curiosity. He ensured the Beaumont Shipping Line's assets were restored to Genevieve, its rightful heir, and that her father's name was cleared of any insinuation of mismanagement. A week after the ball, Genevieve sat in the library of her own London home, her father's home for the first time, without the suffocating weight of suspicion. For 2 years the house had felt like a mausoleum. Now, with the truth revealed, it felt like a home again. A footman announced a visitor. His Grace the Duke of Blackwood. Genevieve stood as Cassian entered the room. He seemed to fill the space, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, solid presence that she had come to associate with safety and strength. "Your Grace," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "Please." "Genevieve," he said, his voice softer than she was used to hearing in public. He dispensed with the title, and the simple use of her name felt more intimate than any touch. "I came to see how you were faring." "I am well," she said, and was surprised to find it was the truth. "The world feels lighter. I can breathe again. It is all thanks to you." "It was thanks to your courage," he corrected her. "You started this. I merely provided the tools." He walked over to the large window that overlooked a small city garden. For a moment he was silent, looking out at the weak afternoon sun. "I owe you an apology," he said, finally turning back to face her. The words were clearly difficult for him, a man unaccustomed to admitting fault. "That first night in the gardens, I was harsh, I misjudged you." "You were right, Cassian," she replied, taking a step closer. "I was reckless. I was alone and desperate, and I was in over my head. I followed you that night." He confessed, his gaze unwavering. "Not just because I was suspicious of Harrington. I was intrigued. For months I had watched you at these insipid parties. Everyone else was playing their part, wearing their masks. But you refused. You kept escaping the cage. I couldn't understand it, and I found I desperately wanted to." He closed the remaining distance between them. "My world is one of order of duty, of cold, hard logic. It has to be. But you were a flash of fire, of defiance, a puzzle I couldn't solve. Following you into that garden was the most illogical, impulsive thing I have done in a decade. And it was the best decision I have ever made." The coldest Duke was melting before her eyes. The icy walls he had built around himself were gone, and in their place was a man of deep feeling and profound integrity, a man who had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else had bothered to look. "You are not the man they say you are," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Not with you," he said. He gently took her hand, his touch sending a familiar warmth racing up her arm. "You have cleared your father's name and reclaimed your life, Genevieve. You are no longer bound to this city's suffocating rules. You are free." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "The question is, what will you do with that freedom?" Genevieve looked into his dark, earnest eyes. The future, which for so long had seemed like a dark, narrow tunnel, now stretched before her, an open road shimmering with possibilities. She had spent 2 years running from a life she was supposed to want. Now she finally knew what she did want. "I think," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I should like to spend it with a man who is not afraid of the dark, a man who isn't afraid to follow a lady into a garden." A slow smile, a genuine, breathtaking smile transformed his severe face, filling it with a warmth that chased away the last of the shadows. "And I would like to spend my life with the woman who was brave enough to lead the way." He lifted her hand to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. The stifling grandeur of the ballroom seemed a world away, a bad dream from a former life. Here, in the quiet light of a new dawn, there were no more secrets, no more masks. There was only the promise of a future not escaped from, but chosen. Together. And so the vanishing lady and the coldest duke found their happy ending, not in the gilded cage of a ballroom, but in the quiet truth they fought for side by side. Theirs is a story that proves that true partnership isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your world, but about finding someone brave enough to build a new one with you. It's a reminder that courage can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind the coldest exteriors, waiting for the right person to uncover them. Did this story of intrigue, justice, and unlikely love captivate you? If you enjoyed watching Genevieve and Cassian unmask a villain and find each other, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good historical drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories that will transport you to another time. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an escape.